Well, hello folks and welcome back. In our last video we introduced you to Double T. Now she's a Westerly Seahawk 35 fin keel. And she was one of the boats we were looking at as a potential as we were looking at upsizing. Now, since the last vid, there's been a few developments.
What?
Yes, fooled you there, didn't we? Well, after the successful sea trial, etc., and completing the formalities and obviously parting with the hard-earned, we were at last the new owners of Double T. So, like any other new boat owner, we spent quite a lot of time sort of going through the boat and finding what was what was where. Personally, I'm still blown away with this cockpit locker. It's massive. We also started to come across a few little snags, but that's to be expected with a used boat. One of them was the fact that the bow thruster didn't seem to want to work. And it was only later that we really appreciated how much we really wanted that bow thruster. But we were also aware that we need to get the boat moved from Swansea to our home berth in Neyland. So, just to put things into perspective for you, Double T was in Swansea Marina, which is on the south coast of Wales here in the UK. It sits on the northern side of the Bristol Channel, a formidable stretch of water in its own right. Swansea City, of course, also known for its football team. And it was also the car theft capital of the UK at one stage. So plans were made and we arrived ready for an early start. Unfortunately, it was already blowing all boots and hissing rain, and the forecast for the morning looked like it could literally go either way. But we were glad of a night out and did decide to go and sample some of the local delights before we spent our very first night on board Double T. Well, next morning in the marina, it was blowing a little bit, but it seemed okay. But looking out into the bay, it was a very different story, and the forecast was suggesting we'd have a headwind for the whole trip. So we decided, you know what, we'll wait for another day. We decided to get on with some of the housekeeping jobs, like getting fuel. We then spent a few hours manoeuvring in the marina and getting the feel for how the boat reacts. I've got to say, it was a harrowing experience, somewhere between bedwetting and a nervous breakdown, but ultimately it did pay dividends. At last, conditions were right to have another go at this, so the plan was to make our way out early in the morning, out past the swing bridge, through the Marina lock, and out into the Towie lock on the river. Then make our way down the channel and out into the Mumbles Bay. From the channel, we'd make our way out towards the Mixon Buoy off the Mumbles, dipping our toe into the Bristol Channel. We'd then follow along the Gower and across Carmarthen Bay. We would then pick up the Pembrokeshire coast and have the diversion option of going to Tenby if need be. But the plan really was to head to the anchorage at Dale. Of course, the secondary plan was to be there before closing time. A distance of over 60 miles on day one, and then finish it off on day two with a run up the Cleddau. Well, best laid plans, as the saying goes, and we got up in the morning to find it thick with fog. In fact, it was so bad you couldn't see one end of the marina from the other. so we delayed our departure, and it did burn off within the marina.
Okay, spot double T is that one right there, the only one with the ensign out.
While the fog had gone from the marina itself, we were actually in for a rude awakening when we came out of the lock. Schoolboy error or what? Yes, indeed, it was pea soup. So with no wind at all, we had to motor sail out into the Mumbles Bay, following the chart plotter very, very closely and a good lookout. Unfortunately, we didn't have any radar, so it was eyeball Mark 1. Rather disturbingly, on some occasions we did hear boat engines, but we never saw them. As you stare into the fog and look out, it doesn't take long before your imagination starts to run wild. And you begin to imagine all kinds of things. Is that some kind of spectral bell? Are we that close in? We're about to head to church. Wait, I see something. Oh, it's a bottle. I don't know, my imagination's running crazy here. Calm down, will you? Get a grip. Anyway, checking the chart, it says the Mixon Boy has a bell on it. It's not a church after all. So we made the best of a bad situation really, and just tried to make the most of it, hoping that eventually the fog would lift. After about 20 miles, it did. The delayed start meant we were into a foul tide, and what little wind there was just abandoned us. So our progress was pretty slow, really, unfortunately. And by the time we were off Tenby, it was actually starting to think about supper time. But this great day still had a few more surprises for us. We were about to get a visit from our friends the Dolphins, and then one hell of a sunset. Well, the delayed start and then, of course, the foul tide meant that we were actually going to arrive in Dale considerably later than we expected. This also meant that I was going to have to negotiate the myriad of buoyage and channels and so forth and make our way into Dale anchorage in the dark. Well, as we dodged shipping and buoys and so forth, there wasn't a great deal of time to film anything, and to be honest, there wasn't a lot to see. Anchoring in the dark for the first time as skipper was a whole new experience, and I took it very carefully. But by about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was pretty convinced that the hook was well settled, and we got our heads down. Well, next morning couldn't have been any more different. Yesterday, it was t-shirt and shorts. Today, it's wet weather gear. But today, there's no urgency, no time windows, no tides to meet. Just a nice relaxing trip up the river as we make the 9-mile passage from Dale to Neyland. Well, at least today we've got some wind. Unfortunately, it's right on the nose again and doesn't help us making our passage up the river. Situated on the River Cleddau, the port of Milford Haven is one of the busiest ports in the country. And the River Cleddau has so much to offer mariners that you can actually spend a whole week here cruising and never actually touch the sea. As we started to make our way into Neyland Marina, we came across the dinghy fleet that were out enjoying the weather, and it proved a little bit of a challenge negotiating our way backwards and forwards through the fleet. Neyland Marina has been our home port for some 5 or 6 years now, so we know the lay of the land quite well. However, coming in with a new boat is always going to be a nerve-wracking experience. Well, in order to give ourselves the best run at getting on to the berth, I decided to make my way into the marina and then turn the boat around to get a better angle. Now this involves actually spinning the boat round using forward and reverse gears. Now this is really where the bow thruster would have been very handy, but instead it's a case of actually using forward and reverse gears and using something we call prop walk to get the back of the boat moving in one direction. Not easy with mud banks, shallow water, and still getting used to a fin keel. In reality, my greatest concern at this stage was actually getting safely onto the berth. I was particularly concerned about the width available to us, or beam. Our previous boat was about 8.5 foot a beam. Double T is over 12. While sped up a little bit here, I tried to come into the berth as slow as I possibly could, and knowing that if I tried to use a bit of reverse thrust to slow the boat down, it would create the prop walk that I was trying desperately to avoid, because it would send us straight towards our neighbours. Perhaps being overcautious, I actually cut it in a little bit too close to avoid our neighbours. Thankfully the guys were all over it with the fenders and did a fantastic job of bailing me out. Safely alongside at last, it was time to secure the boat and then start the cleanup just before the rain arrived. I mentioned before one of our big considerations was available space on the berth. Actually, it was something that was to come back as a recurring theme for us, and eventually we had to move marinas. But that's another story. But for now, it's just time to reflect on a fantastic trip and a great introduction to a wonderful new boat.